All right, so campfire
We
stories
are, yep, and we are live.
are live. So
Yep.
I suppose we should talk about the old days and failure and misery. Because
Ooh. So
I
fish
got
tails
plenty of
by the
those stories.
fire. So fish tails by the fire. Trials and tribulations
That's right. That's right.
of monster catfish.
Well, I suppose you could call it the the learning curve to be able to get to the monster catfish. So I got a
Gotcha.
pretty good one for you. So
All right.
when I was probably either still in high school or just out of high school, I had which I told a little bit of that story earlier in your last one about the plastic 2-man little bass boat with the trolling motor and all that on it, and I used to strap it on top of a Chevy Chevette because that's all we had. We didn't have any money back in those days. That's all we had. And all I knew is I was going to afford whatever I could afford to go fishing. So I had started looking, and this is probably 1985 or 1986. I'd start looking at the maps, and about 25 miles from my house, there's a river called the Illinois River. It was a pretty big river, especially for me at the time, and it's probably in the wide spots, maybe a half mile, 3/4 of a mile wide, probably 12 to probably 20, 25 foot deep at the most. And it's a major tributary of the Mississippi River. So I started concocting these ideas of what I was going to do. And, it was winter and I thought, I'm gonna go here, and I started looking at the map. I said, I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna go there. There was a place called Snatchewine Lake, which was basically a big oxbow that had turned into a lake, uh, pretty much before we even got here before 1776. And I had talked to a couple of old boys and said that and this was, I don't know, 35, 40 years ago. And well, I don't suppose it was 40, 50 years ago, probably, 40, 35 years ago or so. So I had talked to some guys down at Henry, which was the town that's about 20, 25 miles from where I live. And they were telling me stories about the giant flatheads that were in the Illinois River, but not in their experience, but in their dad's experience. And these guys were probably 85, 90 years old. And
Oh yeah, I love those stories.
oh yeah, and it enthralled me, and it was basically before the dams were there. Pre 1939, 36, 1940, and they were talking to me about Snatchewine Lake used to be 30 feet deep and clear, and the giant crappies they used to catch, and there used to actually be a species of trout that is actually extinct now. And I question a bunch of people, including the DNR and all this stuff, and they don't even really have a name for it. But it used to be fairly large and live in the Illinois River system. It was attached to Lake Michigan, and before they changed the flow. And the river was clear, and this is before industrial style farming. So there wasn't a lot of silt going into it. It was pretty clear. And they said there was a field in Snatchewine Lake of lily pads as far as the eye could see. And so I started getting interested in Snatchewine Lake, Senechewine. And it was actually, I had talked to some other people that there was an Indian settlement there years ago. And just a incredible little thing. And so here I, strap my 2-man bass boat and trolling motor, and I get one of my friends, and we said, we're going to Snatchewine Lake. And we get there, and there's no lily pads, there's no nothing, which I didn't really expect. I thought, well, maybe there'd be some left. And
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of windy that day, and it was kind of white cappy because the thing's probably, I don't know, maybe a mile and a half square miles, and you could see the main channel, which was, it was a long way away, probably a mile and a half. And I'm expecting lily pads, and I'm expecting a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'm thinking that I could go out there and still find some deep water. And we shoved that little boat off of that Chevy Chevette down the thing and into the water, and I got the trolling motor running. We got all of our gear together, and we went out there. And it was a little wavy, and I got my little, I don't know, it was an Eagle 210 or something like that fish finder, and all I could mark was 2.5 foot of water. And I'm thinking, well, there's got to be some deep water here somewhere. So I crisscrossed, and we went around, and we just looked and looked and looked. And I get from the shore where we launched a mile and a half towards the timber line, and we get to this area that looks like Louisiana. It's got gigantic soft maple trees, and it didn't have cypress, but it's got
Yeah.
gigantic soft maple trees that are in the water all the time. And we marked, I don't know, 3.5, 4 feet of water, and I didn't really know anything about current at the time, and there's fish flopping, and it looked so awesome and fishy back there that I started just navigating between the trees, and I would find a couple of spots, and we had and back in those days I used a lot of chubs, and so we got cut chub out, and we've got night crawlers out, and we've got all this stuff, and I'm throwing a few live baits, I'm throwing a couple of live sunfish and things like this, and we start getting, bite after bite, and we just can't hook them. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? And my experience level was just minimal at that time, about river fishing. Actually, I'd fished a lot of lakes, I fished a lot of
That's
this.
before all the 35, 45 years of DNR and all that stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was 17, 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And so, um, you know, but it looked like a movie set back there. Something you would see, giant catfish and alligators and all this other stuff. And so we're fishing with our push button Zebco 33s, and I'm dreaming of monsters, and all we can catch is bullheads and gar. Make a long story short. So I decide that that's not very good, and it's still daylight out. And we get to the edge of the tree line where the current's a little bit better, and we end up catching a couple of decent channel cats, 4 or 5 pounds. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is pretty good, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and I got slip bobbers, and I've got all these ideas, and I'm starting to get excited, because we caught a couple fish, and for the next hour and a half, we didn't catch anything, nothing. I mean, nothing. So I take that little boat, and we skirt that tree line, because what it is it's basically when the water's dry, it's almost an island out there, and it's probably, I don't know, 500 yards wide by, I'd say probably 3 or 4 miles long, and you can't see the main river, but the water was actually up enough when we went that there was a little current flowing through there, not much, just a little. And then there was an inlet that I had remembered from the map. So I got on the outside of that, and I went through this little inlet, and it was 4 to 6 feet of water, and you could tell that the bottom was hard clay, even back in those days with the terrible graphs we had. So I set up on basically the entrance point of this island, where the main river came in and kind of came around. We've got this gigantic lake off to the off to the left and the right, and we're in this kind of narrow pass. And I throw 2 live bluegills, and one of them gets hit, and I mean gets hit hard and fast, which I didn't understand. Here I am thinking I got a flathead, and I'm actually fairly close to the main channel at this point. And I ended up catching about a 19-pound channel cat, and that thing ripped drag, I mean, for 25 minutes because I wasn't prepared for, fish of even that caliber, even though I'm trying to catch even bigger ones than that. So
Yeah.
here we are thinking we're just, in tall cotton and all this stuff. And here I see a storm coming. And I'm like, oh man, we just landed a monster for us at the time. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not too worried about it. Not too worried about it at all. So we keep fishing, and with those little trolling motor operated boats, that's one thing you probably don't want to do is get into the main river, because it's not all that wide, and there's pretty big barges that come down it, and you really can't get out of the way. So I thought, okay, we're just going to stick with this. And we kind of, fished a little here and fished a little there. And we ended up catching some decent channel cats, some gar, and some big dumb bullheads. And I'm thinking this is pretty good. And we're by this time it's almost dark. And here comes the storm. And I mean to tell you what, my trolling motor was running out of battery, and we were against the waves. And the waves, these weren't just little white caps either. It started as 3.5 to 4 foot rollers. And then it broke into white caps. And luckily, those little 2-man bass boats are sealed. So they float good even with water in them, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
Because now a guy would think if it's only 2.5 feet of water, you could just get out of the boat and just, push it to shore. Yeah. That is not the case in Snatchwine Lake because, of course, this is the breadbasket of America. And what do we have? We have 10 foot of silt. So when you take a pole and you hit the bottom, it just smushes in forever. It's like Gilligan's Island quicksand underneath there.
And if you say it's just like quicksand, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a drowner. If you try to push your boat. Well, anyway, the trolling motor's starting to die, and the buddy of mine that I got on the front of the boat is about 220 pounds. Name's Chuck Leeper. And we're both about half scared to death. And we got the oars out. And we're rowing, and we're trying to row up and down. It took us, I swear to God, 45 minutes to get back to the truck in the dark in those giant waves. And the boat was flush. I mean, there's only a lot of the stuff like floated out of the boat, but it was quite the harrowing experience. And then we get to shore. I go to get in the truck, and I look for my keys. They're not in the tackle box. They're not in my pockets. They're in the truck. And to make things worse, I said, okay. So I got to break a window on my truck because this is in the middle of nowhere. It's not like you're going to call AARP or something and they're going to even be able to find you. This is off the beaten path. There's none of that shit anywhere. I'm the only truck on the whole thing. And I had an old Jeep Cherokee truck at the time. It was red. I don't even think the windshield wipers even worked back in those days. Sorry, this was the Chevette. That's another story. I'm getting things mixed up. So on the Chevette, the keys are in it, and it's locked. And they had the little side windows at the time. I think it was the back window. And I ended up deciding I was going to just smash the smallest window because that'd be the cheapest. Oh, no. I'd have been way better off to just smash out one of the roll down windows because that thing was like $60. The other one was like $200. So,
good gosh.
Yeah. And, little did I know, all I needed was to get out of Snatchwine Lake and into the main current with a decent boat, and I'd have been on all kinds of big channel cats. But that was back in the day when I thought it was possible to catch flatheads in the Illinois River of some sort of consequence. And they're there, but there's just not a heavy population. I didn't understand that at all.
Yeah.
So that is one story that sticks in my mind, and I've got 100,000 of them. I wouldn't say that, but I got 199 of them that are pretty much ended like that. Using too big of baits, well, that's what we'll start into the next one. So I'd
Let's
seen a
say hi to
show.
a few of the people. Let's say hi to a few of the people that's in here. We got Mike's Fishing Home, Rams Bait and Tackle.
Hey, Mike.
We've got Sunfish Assassin, Fins and Fouls. We got NI Fishing Tales from UK. Joe Ziegler's in the house.
Nice. Nice.
Big Mike.
What's up? What's up, Joe? Big Mike?
We got Big Dan from UK. We got Alvin Lewis, Christy Brown. We got Lisa Lee. I know Abbott was in here
That's a pretty
earlier.
good
We got
turnout for
Rolling with
what's going
Raquel.
on.
Yeah,
That's a pretty
Rolling
good
with
turnout
Raquel.
for
She's
what's going on YouTube tonight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What's going on, Raquel? Appreciate you coming in here. They have a little family channel that I've been watching and keeping an eye
Nice.
on. They have a little fun with spouses and stuff. And they'll do games and stuff. So it's pretty interesting. 351. There's Avid, small town. There's Steve Sellers.
What up, Avid in small town? Steve Sellers.
Yep, we say about around 8 to 13 people in there.
All right. So I guess the topic of tonight is the learning curve and failure that goes with it. So
yep.
I got another good one. This is the time that I used a Zara spook to keep the boat from sinking. This is a good one. So I had a little John boat at the time, and my girlfriend's boyfriend talked me into going and signing up for a catfish tournament on the Rock River. And this John boat had a 40-horse longshank on it, and I had no idea that the Rock River was such a disaster as far as shallow water versus deep water. And the thing that's different about the Rock River, and it's a good catfish river, don't get me wrong, but generally speaking, when you go to an inside bend, that's usually the shallows. When you go into an outside bend, that's usually the deeper spot. So we're cooking along, and we had put in, I don't know, maybe a mile up. And I shoot this outside bend, not too close to the bank, pretty much right where that main channel would have been. And I mean, we hit bottom bigger than depths. Oh yeah, with my 40-horse longshank. And oh yeah. And so I'm thinking to myself, what kind of river is this? You know, it was like pretty much the first time I'd ever put a boat on it, besides below the dam. And that's another story that I'll tell at another date. But
Valerie's got a comment for you.
Yeah. What do you got?
Did you say your girlfriend? She said, Tim, did you say your girlfriend's boyfriend?
No, I said my girlfriend's sister's boyfriend. Well, you guys should know me better than that. I mean, you don't know me that well, but you know I wouldn't tolerate that kind of crap. But maybe I said it. I'm trying to think back to exactly that situation because I haven't thought about this stuff in years. But anyway, my girlfriend's sister's boyfriend talked me into a catfish tournament, and here we are. It's hardly daylight, and we've already run aground going about 25 miles an hour. I mean, just right to a dead halt. And luckily, I didn't burn the motor up. But I'm thinking, what do we got going here? You know, the outside's shallow, the inside's deep, and then we go down a little bit farther and we go around this hairpin turn, and the only deep water, I mean, you can see gravel on each side. And it's just kind of down the middle, but it's got a gigantic tree and a root ball right in the middle of it. And so we got to kind of skirt that, and I got to get out, drag the boat a little bit, and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a disaster. So we hadn't really been in the water that long. But evidently, when we run aground at one point, or when I was dragging the boat, I ripped the plug out of the bottom of the boat. Because we finally got into some deeper water, and we got onto some fish, and we caught some decent channel cats, and we actually caught one flathead. but somehow because it had a false floor in it. So by the time we started that motor again and started going, this thing is like uncontrollably splashing and slashing this way and slashing that way. And I thought, oh, geez, what is going on here? So I looked at the motor, and then all of a sudden, once I stopped, that's when the water started coming up through the floor. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I didn't have any spare plugs. I didn't have anything. But what I did have is I had a balloon and a Zara spook. And so I parked that thing on shore, got out in the water because it had a bilge pump and we started running that, but I knew it was going to take a while. And luckily, since it had a false, just a secondary false floor, because we wouldn't have been able to bail it out at all. We had 1,000 pounds of water in that thing. And so I take this Zara spook and a hammer that I luckily had in the boat still, and I put a balloon over the Zara spook, and I pounded that thing in there, and we fished the rest of the tournament, and we actually got second in this tournament, and there was 86 boats in it. We ended up catching an eel, and I had no idea what eel were at the time, but it was real slimy. It was an American eel. It was probably, I don't know, 2 foot long. And I decided I was going to cut this thing up and use it. And I'm telling you what, it did better than shad. It did better than chubs. It did better than anything. And all we had is one eel. And we ended up catching, I think, probably 8 out of our 10 good fish that we were going to keep in that tournament on that eel. And had I known what eel were actually about, I would have reused it a lot more, because I was thinking it was more like shad, because I didn't have any experience with eel till I went to the James River like 15, 20 years later. And this is before the circle hook days, and I was trying to coach, because this kid, he didn't know much about catfishing. All he knew was that I knew a lot about catfishing for the day. And he's thinking, man, we're going to be number one in the top spot. And we ended up getting second. We did catch big fish in the tournament, though. I think it was 14 pounds. But I didn't know a whole lot about flatheads in those days either. Wish I would have. That would have been interesting. But yeah, a balloon and a Zara spook saved our bacon.
I know somebody had a question. See if you had any. Let me see if I can find it. It was. There it is. Alan Brashala says,
What's up, Alan?
Does Epic have any Lax Vex desert tails?
Yes, I do, brother. All right. So this might be a little bit long and involved, but it'll be good. And it doesn't, it's Lac Vedazer is how the locals pronounced it when we went. So I suppose I was probably 16, 17 years old at the time. And a friend of mine that grew up, I don't know, 6, 7 blocks from me on the old Silver Street, when we used to have BB gun wars and all that stuff. I mean, he was big into hunting and fishing, and we just really hadn't gotten together all that much. But by the time I was probably 16 or so, he said, his name was Bill Fisher. He said, go figure, he still fishes a lot to this day. So what are you doing, honking, Kelly? So anyways, he called me up one summer, and he says, well, it was actually spring, and he says, you want to go up to my parents' cabin and do some fishing for a week? I said, yeah. I said, when you're in grade school together and all that, you might talk about fishing, but you don't really get to go do a whole bunch. And we're just like, just now getting our driver's licenses. And I said, well, sure I do. And so we ended up talking about this and talking about that and looking at, and he had a bunch of maps, and he was pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. But there's no real catfishing going on up there, and that's all right, because there's big smallmouth, there's big pike, there's muskie, there's just the stuff that a kid dreams of. Because really, I hadn't experienced a ton of it I'd caught some
Mm-hmm.
smallmouth and some good pike and stuff like that when I was young, because my parents took me up to Minnesota when I was probably 13 or 14, and caught some big ring perch and all that stuff. And, I got to experience all that stuff. But this was different. This wasn't a parent trip. This was us boys going to the cabin. We were going to spend a hardcore week of fishing. And so the lake that his mom and dad had a cabin on, it wasn't no big fancy cabin. It was one of those things they bought in the 60s. It barely had I don't even think back when they bought it, it even had a good road. I think it was pretty much logging roads up there, because I heard his dad talking that when they used to go up there years ago, there would be 2 lanes of traffic about 3/4 of the way there. And then it was basically 1 lane of gravel. And so it would take them like 12 hours to get up there. But by this time, there's regular roads and all this stuff. So anyway, we get up there and we start deciding where we're going to fish. So their cabin was on a lake called Lac de Loon, and Lac de Loon had been stocked with bass, which it used to be a great northern pike and smallmouth, but they stocked it with largemouth, which kind of messed that up as far as, if anybody knows the balance of those lakes. And it was a fairly shallow lake. So we start ranging out, and we had a canoe. We had like the little boat to go out on the regular lake, which is a pretty big lake. But we had fished it for a couple of days, and we decided we were going to look at the maps and figure out where to go. So Lac Bay d'Isère wasn't really that far away, and it didn't have a regular boat launch. And so we're thinking, okay, we're going to put the canoe in, we're going to do all this stuff. And so we go and catch some chubs, and we've got our regular, and the target was going to be muskie. And we had put in Lac Bay d'Isère, beautiful lake, beautiful, very deep, but then it's got an island in the middle, and then it's almost like a barbell. So you got 2 deep sections, and this is how I remember it. Probably don't have it exactly perfect, but 2 deep sections, and then there's like an island in the middle, and then there's like a shallow pass that you can see the bottom. So we are in between one of those shallow passes, and we're casting jigs for big smallmouth. And we had seen some suckers earlier, because there's big populations of white suckers in almost every lake clear up there. And we had seen some suckers when we launched, and I looked down and I see what I thought was a couple of very big suckers, and my eyes kind of zoomed out as I was trying to see what that was going on. It was only about 3.5, 4 feet of water. And it wasn't suckers. It was actually the pectoral fins of one of the biggest muskies I've ever seen in my life, still to this day. And I've caught some muskies up to 50 inches. This thing was a monster, and it made my heart beat so hard. And I got the chubs out, and I'm telling you, we fished for this thing, and it saw us. It's very similar to the story of the big yellow flathead. And I don't have a lot of stories like that, but in Lac de Loon, it wasn't paying attention to us until he saw us move, and it kind of looked at us and kind of slinked off. And I mean, we tried to catch that thing for another 2 hours. We ended up catching some decent muskie. We ended up catching some, decent smallmouth. And it's actually, I believe it's, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was one of the few ones that they had stocked lake trout in them. And we knew nothing about lake trout at that time. But yeah, it was a very, very cool experience, especially, being that young and seeing a fish of that caliber. I would hate to guess how big. I'm sure right around the 50-inch mark, uh, maybe 52, maybe 54. But that thing looked like it was bigger around than one of those big giant coffee can, those old style Folgers 5-pound coffee cans. That's how it
Mm-hmm.
looked. Now I don't
Yeah.
know, I can't trust my recollection that good on that, because it was in about 3.5 feet of water. But I have not seen a muskie out of the water or in the water that big since then. It's quite the experience. But man, we used to go, I mean, walleye fishing at night, and the mosquitoes would bite you to death, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, we went and found creeks because, creek chubs was one of those things where you could go to the bait shop and try to afford them, but we didn't have any money. So I mean, we're fishing for creek chubs and we're scrounging around for this, and we went to a bog lake off the backside of Bucket Tobin one time after the bass had been in there a while, and I mean, I don't know if we caught 50 bass and 30 crappies. It was absolutely crazy. So Loch de Loon, isn't it a small world?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We
So
talked
what
about
else we
last
got?
week. You were probably going to be talking about some. Not really anybody's asking anything. Just a couple people saying hi and everything.
So
What
remind me
about
of
some
what I
stories
told you
about
last
Sean?
week I was going to talk about.
Sean.
Oh, we were going to talk about Sean. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I got 100 stories, so I'll pick one or five. So Sean, he's got big fish fever. There's no doubt about it. But when I came up on him at the canal, and he'll tell you the same story, what I was doing was I was going to catch bluegill. And there's a canal, I don't know, 20 miles from us, 15 miles from us. And it stretches in two directions. One end attaches to the Rock River, the other end attaches to the Mississippi. And then there's another end that attaches to the Illinois River, and it's got a series of locks and tubes. It's relatively slow, but since they come from the Rock, the Mississippi, and the Illinois, uh, it's basically the same water. So I was there catching bluegill for my flathead trips when I was a guide, and this has been 15, 20 years ago. And so um, I go down there, and Sean's with his son, and they're kind of fishing in the lock. And I wouldn't say they didn't know what they were doing, but they didn't really know what they were doing. I kind of blew in there on that same lock. I'd already jumped about 3 or 4 locks, and my goal was to catch 500 bluegills in one day because I needed to put them in my large tank so that I had enough, because it'd take me about 50 bluegills a trip to do a good, accurate trip in which we're throwing a lot. We're going to have some of them killed, but sometimes you catch 20 flathead, sometimes you're going to catch 10, and so yeah, my average was going to be about 50, and I had one day a week to do it because I was booked for another 5 or 6 days. So I blow in there, and I got my little tiny bobber and my whatever, and I'm fishing these spots, which most people, they go to the lock and they just kind of throw out. They got the big night crawler with the jig and the bigger, the big red and white
Mm-hmm.
bobber and stuff like that. So I'm throwing basically an ice fishing float with a tiny ice jig, no weight, and I'm throwing it into what I call the foam pattern. And so him and his son are kind of fishing right there, and I'm talking to him. I've known him for a long time, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I told him the whole story of what I was doing and whatever, and so I just plunk it in there, basically just underneath the foam, and boom, catch one, boom, catch one, boom, catch one. So I ended up catching, while I was talking to him, 15, 20 bluegills in that one spot. Went down to the end. There's a little bit of blowout. They're feeding on bugs, doing that. I catch another 10 or 20. So I put him in my thing, and he's like, "What are you doing that for?" And I told him, and I said, "Matter of fact, there's flatheads in the canal." He says, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, there's some big ones in the canal." I said, and I kind of said, "This is what you do," and I gave him some weights, and I gave him some hooks, and I kind of told him, how to set up and all that stuff. And after that, I didn't hear from him for probably another 6, 8, 10 months. I was busy, he was busy, but he started fishing that canal, and he started having some good success with 15, 20, 25, 30 pound flatheads. And ever since, he's been ate up with it. So fast forward a little bit, I got busier with the furniture business, and my kids were of the age, and I kind of had to kind of shut the guiding down because furniture business started paying better than the guiding. So I mean, you have to make a choice. I hated to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
it just took up so much time. for me. And so I kind of I didn't really see Sean for a while, and then I saw him after that, and he started telling me about the flatheads, and you could hear the excitement in his heart, and you could see that he was ate up with big fish. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to take you flathead fishing on the Mississippi. And he said, really? He goes, that'd be great, because no matter how good a fisherman you are, no matter how heartfelt you are, no matter how much time you put, there's a lot of time in waiting for flatheads to come to you on a nondescript 4.5 foot deep thing that's like 100 and some miles long. You're gonna have to put the time in. So I didn't really give him any expectations. We launched the boat. We go across to one of my big donkey spots. I bait up, throw out. I said, Sean, get ready. He's like, what do you mean, get ready? We just got here. I said, get ready. And before I could even spit that out of my mouth, the rod goes down. Bam! Because I had put it in such a classic spot. It was I've talked about it before. It was actually the Bubba Fish spot, where there was a barge one side. It was really close to an island. I mean, barely fit a boat into it. And then there was a root ball off of a 7-foot ledge leading into 14-foot, and they're just positioned actively there. So, and it doesn't always happen, but most time it does. And he locked into that fish, and he was so impressed with the current and how hard that fish fought, and how quickly that bite was there. He was sold. He's like, I don't. He just couldn't even get his head around it. For like the next week, he's like, I cannot believe, because we did it like 2 or 3 more times. We ended up catching a fish, I don't know, 35 pounds. It was the biggest one. And he's like, you can do that all the time? I'm like, yeah, I can do that all the time. And he was just amazed. And so we flathead fished together occasionally. And then we got to where I was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the big fish zone. He's like, what do you mean? It's like, blue cats. He's like, I don't know. Because he's in love with flatheads. I mean, he's a big time flathead guy. I'm like, dude, you gotta see what these fish are like. This is freaking crazy. I said, they're gonna take rods down. Sometimes it take you 45 minutes. He goes, 45 minutes? He goes, I seen the rods you've got for doing that. He goes, 45 minutes? I said, oh yeah. I said, sometimes it will. It depends on what current you're in. And he's like, all right, I'm in. So my oldest son was, gosh, at this point, he was probably 14. He says, all right, Garrett and I are going down there. We're going to go down there. And I said, and Sean had only been on the Mississippi up here, which it's way small. It's way less intimidating up here than it is down there. Because, I mean, you got barges constantly going. It's industrial. It gets dark, and the freaking currents flying every which way. I mean, you guys have seen my lives. To be there in real life is a lot more impressive than just watching it on the live show. But because, I mean, there's always stuff that can happen. Big trees are floating down. There's a giant Asian carp coming into the boat, and it's hot, and then it gets cold, and then it rains. So anyways, so Garrett and I go down there, and Sean. And Sean wasn't really involved in catching the bait. So we get on the water, and we get to looking around. And I said, Sean, why don't you grab me one of them baits? Because we had pretty much set up on our first anchor. And he looks in there and goes, Jesus. He goes, what are these things? Because they were like 2-foot suckers. We had some other and stuff like that. But he's like, what are we going to do with that? I said, we're going to use that for bait. He goes, I wish I had a tape recorder. I was filming him right then. He goes, I don't know what he said. Well, I think I know what he said. I think he said something about, are you fishing for bull sharks or what? I said, well, if a bull shark's here, we'll try to catch him, but blah blah blah. So anyway, we the water
Yeah.
was a lot higher the first time I took him than any time that I've shown it in any of either the videos or the lives or anything. I think it was running at 19 feet, and it's only running at 5 right now, or even lower than that. So this place is cooking. I mean, cooking. So we go to one of my traditional spots, and I try to anchor up on the tip of a wing dike because I marked some massive fish, a couple of them, right on the tip of the wing dike in 38 foot of water. And like right now, it would only be like maybe 28 foot now because it's got a pour off. It's not that the depth, at 19 versus 5, you don't just subtract that. It's got a pour off. So like below the dam at 19 or wherever the thing is at 19, it'll pool up or fall off. It's actually got a drop. So we set up on this, and I didn't have my giant hurricane anchor yet like I do now. I had a different anchor with about 12 foot of rope. It was still probably a 30-pound anchor, not a 40-pound anchor. But on the tips of those wing dikes on that current seam, like you guys watched us when we caught the 70 and the 280s, I couldn't anchor there. It just kept blowing you back, blow, just kept going because it's mostly sand out there. It's not clay. If it was clay, it would have been fine, but it's mostly sand out there. And it's like these sand humps because you got to kind of triangulate the boat so that the tip of the wing dike's here. You mark the fish right here. You got to go directly up from it in a little bit because when that current's going, it'll shoot you way off target. We were on target. And so the boat's just sort of slowly dragging downstream, and I got 200 foot of rope out. I said, okay, we're going to have to ambush these fish because, I normally like to basically anchor up on them and throw out and expect a bite within 20, 30 minutes or less and catch big fish. So we went up and over the wing dike that right now is sticking out of the water by 5 feet. Went up and over the wing dike, tucked in closer to that barge, got on the current seam, and we threw some moon eye out, and we threw some giant sucker hens. And I didn't have a bunch of suckers. I just had 2 or 3. And so Sean gets first fish, Garrett gets second fish, and I get third fish, if at all. Because normally, I've done it so often, I don't even, I mean, I care, but it's just one of those things. But anyway, we put the baits out, and the first rod gets hit, and it's the same. By this time, this is all fast forwarded. I've got decent equipment. I've got the big rods, the big reels, the heavy line, and all this stuff. I got the donkey weights, got all that stuff. So the one on the inside gets hit, and I mean it's just smoke and drag. Sean gets that one, and it's like 36 pounds. You can't believe it. And these things are trying to, smack him and rolling and all this stuff. And he's like, man, I thought channel cats were just, I thought blues were just like big channel cats. I'm like, oh no, these things are crazy. So we ended up catching like somewhere in the territory of 20 fish between 18 and 36 to 40 pounds on that one anchor in like an hour and a half. It was just great guns, just going on, just going. It was pretty, if we'd have caught bigger fish on that, it would have been one of my top 10 anchors because I know it was more than 20 fish. So we ended up we ended up moving around, and we actually went to the opposite side of the river, caught a couple 20s or 30s, and it was about time to go because I mean we had such a good time. We'd already went down there. We're going to fish another day. So we go up to the 80-pound spot, and we had done so well on the big sucker heads and the big giant baits that we've only got one sucker head left. We ended up catching 5 fish on the one sucker head. The moon eye, they really weren't hitting it very good. Maybe the bait was too small. We ended up catching 5 good fish, and we ended up catching Well, a rod got ripped out of the boat. Big surprise there. Uh, it was kind of
Yeah.
Garrett's fault because he was kind of right over it, and it's got that little star on the end where it positions, and the fish actually ripped it
Yeah.
down like this because evidently it wasn't whatever, and shot out of the boat. We never got that one back, and it was one of my best rigs. Uh, and as far as somebody. A guy that you really want to take fishing is the guy that really appreciates it. And man, I'll tell you what, Sean does. He is he's sick with it. He's got his phone. He's got his he's got his what does he call that? His I guess I don't even remember what he calls it, but it's basically his picture gallery. His gallery. It's full of flatheads and it's full of this
Yeah.
and that and the other. And he can get in there, and it doesn't matter if it's 20 years ago. He can tell you exactly what that fish bit on, how long it took, all this crazy stuff. It's pretty enjoyable to take Sean, and he's funny. Always has been.
Oh yeah.
Never know what you
Oh,
always know what
I was
Sean's
gonna
gonna
say he
do.
always cracks us.
Huh?
I said he always cracks us up on the lives. Always.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You always know what he's gonna do, but you never know what he's gonna say. Yeah.
We're talking
All
about
right, Kelly. What else we got?
awesome stories. Let's see. I mean, this is your story time.
All right. Well, you want to hear about the time I was using 2 foot suckers alive with 4/0 true turn bass hooks out of my out of my plastic 2-man boat below Shelbyville Dam. Holy moly! So the guy at the bait shop ended up telling me what you need those big suckers, and you got to drift them below this dam. And here I am with basically, I think the best reel I had was like a Zebco 88 with 20-pound test, and I'm stacking sinkers like this tall because I had caught some big live, and they were red horse suckers, but they weren't golden red horse suckers. I forget which kind they were. Some of them were like dark with a red tail, and I'd caught 3 or 4 of those, so I trolled my happy ass up to the dam, and I started, and I actually got some bites. But with flatheads, that's when I started to figure out that too big of baits is a detriment. And, I would see these teeth marks, on both sides. You got the pad mark on one side, no pad mark on the other. And, the rod went down like this. And I tried to set the hook with that whippy thing. And, man, I'll tell you what, I wish I had, I wouldn't trade it, but I kind of wish that I had that time back because, back in the day before I had responsibility and job and all that stuff and I had all that time to fish, I just didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was getting there.
Yeah.
I was kind of putting that little formula together, but man, I'll tell you, using giant quillback carp suckers that I caught out of a 3-foot net with 3/8. I ruined more nets throwing them in the dumbest spots you could ever imagine. And you get a quill back, you try to use that thing for live bait, and you might get hit by a 50-pounder. But it took me years to figure out that the best thing for me to use is a bait for flatheads about maybe 4, 5, 6 inches long. And because they'd half grab them and take them, and you're trying to set the hook, and you're doing it, and I switched over to circle hooks in October for flatheads in October of, I think it was 2002, because I just didn't believe in them, for flatheads, because a lot of times flatheads just won't take the rod down. They'll just, and so I was still using regular J hooks, and I was actually the second boat in a film situation. I think it was Visual Films. Denny Hallgren was fishing at what's called the 13-inch mill at the on the Rock River. It's below Rock Falls, and there's some skinny water to get there, but then it opens up into a deep water situation. So it was October 31st. It was actually Halloween. I think it was the 30th. It was the day before Halloween. And usually by then you're not going to catch big numbers up here, but it was unusually warm. And I had just thrown out a few baits with a Daiichi Circle Chunk Light, which now is called the Double Action Team Catfish hook. And here I was helping the camera crew out and doing this, but you know, I brought my own baits and I was fishing, and we were just basically boat to boat. That's how you get those, you know, those side shots. You know, Denny was fishing, you know, with the host of the show, and I was kind of, you know, just making sure the boat was positioned. But I ended up throwing it off this there's a 7-foot flat that comes out, and then it drops down into about 15-16 foot before it finally goes down into 25. And I had thrown a couple baits out there, and here we were. I was holding, I don't know whether it was a microphone boom or something like that. And I see a rod go off, and it actually loaded up slow like this, and then kind of went down. And I just kind of set the boom down, and I picked it up, and sure as shit, it was there. I'm like, huh, maybe this is gonna happen with circle hooks, you know. And I was kind of a doubting Thomas because I'd gotten good enough with setting the hook on him, and I was, and I don't know, I ended up catching like 7 flatheads that day. Didn't miss a single one on the Daiichi Circle Chunk Lights, 7-ounce. And that kind of made a believer out of me. So I started fishing with those, and a lot of my clients weren't sold on them. So I had to constantly teach these guys what to do and how to do it. Because I mean, they're used to bass setting and crossing their eyes and all this stuff, and I'm like, no, just wait. Because every once in a while we'd have a fish on, and another fish would go off, or 2 fish would go off, and if it was just regular J hooks, I would miss them. And every once in a while, if you're busy with a 25 and a 50 hits, that's disappointing. So yeah, it was. It was pretty cool. So, how much time we got left?
All right, we got all the time you got. It's we've been about 52 minutes in so far.
All right. So, let's see. Spent the night on the Rock River once.
Got any?
I did spend the night on the Rock River a bunch of times.
I was gonna say.
Huh?
Yeah. I was gonna say, do you have any more of your top 10s?
Oh yeah, I do, but I don't want to like spit them all out at once because guess what, Kelly? I figured out how to get that video transferred to where I can make a video out of it. It's old video, but I've just now figured out how to screen record that, and I'm gonna make a good video. Narration with the story, the old video clips showing the fish, all that stuff. You know, probably be this winter, but it's going to be awesome. I might even interview John and Dustin on this thing. I don't know. I don't want to say that I'm going to do stuff if I don't have time to do it, but that's what I ultimately like to do. And I would start with that one because I've already told the story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Tell us a heartbreak. You got a heartbreak one?
Oh my gosh, I got a lot of heartbreak ones, but they don't make the greatest stories. I mean, when you see a fish that's monstrous and it's rolling in the current and the sinker's slapping back and forth and all this stuff, and you've waited all your life to catch a fish of this caliber, and then all of a sudden it breaks the leader line because you're not smart enough to use anything more than 25-pound test. I got a lot of those. I mean, especially early on, you know, spend 7 days down in Alton and, you know, down on the Mississippi, and you're staying on an island in a freaking, I once stayed in a hammock. That was before that there was like, I mean, it was just a plain ass hammock. And yeah, I got bit up at night a little bit, got cold a few times. River come up on me once, about wiped my tent away. You know, but stuff like that. There's a bunch of heartbreak ones, but I'd rather tell stories of victory.
Okay.
All right, Kelly. It's been an hour. We'll save some stories for another day.
Okay. Appreciate you all coming
All
in.
right,
We've
brother.
had about 13, 14 people in here at all times.
Nice.
This is another part 2 of Epic Tales.
All right.
So
Well, we might
appreciate y'all
just do it
coming
again
in.
next week.
Make sure. Okay. I know we've got Chris Souders on November 9th for some tackle talk.
Okay.
We've also
Just
talked
let me
about
know.
having him on doing some tales. Okay. I think
All right,
if
Kelly.
I look at my calendar, I think we might do it next week.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
See ya.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you all. We'll see y'all later.